Can't hear.
Is Mike talking? Because I don't hear anything.
Is Mike talking?
I can't hear anything.
I can hear you.
I can't either.
I mean, I can hear you guys.
I can
Yeah,
hear you. I can hear you. I'm gonna have to leave a little early. I have a meeting, but I'll stay as long as I can.
it'd be nice to see who's in the room and maybe text somebody in the room and tell them we can't hear them.
Okay. Who's there? Probably, you think Jim's there?
Let me put to speaker view. Oh, well. That didn't help because it's us that's talking.
Okay, you've texted that you cannot hear, so maybe that's.
No, I don't know who to text.
Well, Mike did that.
I just
Okay.
put in the chat that we cannot hear the room.
Yeah, that's good.
But
Or
if nobody
Well,
in the room might be listening to the chat, though.
Somebody should be on the computer, but
now there's somebody else arriving that has no face. Okay, chat. They may have muted us. I think they probably muted us.
yeah, but if they muted us, that shouldn't affect them being muted.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
how are y'all doing?
I would love to hear what's going on.
I would too. I'm disappointed.
I know.
I'm emailing Barb right now.
I know he's doing this class at Good Shepherd. You could drive in there real quick.
Well, but we're
I
in
know.
Tahoe, which is why we're doing it by Zoom.
Okay, worship tech to meet, working on it. So sorry, it says on mine.
Okay, good.
All right. Well, they got to get the first one worked out. I'm sure they're introducing this and
Yeah.
about it. I'm glad he's teaching the class. That's very good. I'm thrilled about it. I hate to have to miss this time, but most of it. But anyway.
I'm gonna go grab my charger for the laptop.
I'm on my phone. So, are you on your laptop or your desktop?
I'm on my laptop.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I was able to go in and the worship text window was there and I was able to pin that to my screen. So at least I can see
I can see too.
the group.
Yeah.
I can see everybody right now. I see Father Mike in profile and he's talking and his hands are up, but there's no sound.
There's no sound.
That's what it's been for me since I got on here 5 minutes ago.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I may have to go to my meeting then.
At least it's being recorded so you can watch it later.
Oh, that's what I'll do. I did that one time when I was on the Bond Lane bus going to Dallas and I heard it later. All right, folks, I'll see you when I see you. I'll try to get off of here. Good luck.
Yeah, I know, but I ask questions, you know.
I like questions too, but there I go. Okay. Am I off yet or not? There I am. Leave, cancel, leave.
Okay, there's somebody up there that's going to try a different microphone. That's good.
No, it's not that we can't hear him, it's there's no sound.
Well, what's the difference?
But I mean, it's not like the volume needs to go up. There's no volume to go up.
Well, maybe the microphone that he's using isn't connected to the computer and she just gave him a microphone that is.
The computer should be
there. It says connecting to audio now.
We should be hearing the ambient room. Yeah.
Okay.
Like,
Michael, do you have a suggestion for her how to fix it? Because she's just trying to.
let me ask.
It looked like it was Barbara.
Right.
Yeah.
Just get the ambient sound from the computer. The computer's microphone. Maybe that makes sense. I think maybe she thought that it wasn't loud enough or something. Because why would you adjust the mic that's supposed to project him to them? You know,
Yeah. Right.
like we don't have sound. Like the computer sound might not be on.
So it's just something on the computer that she needs to.
It's got to. It has to be because there's no sound whatsoever. I'm going to give it like 5 minutes before I dump.
Yeah.
I'm glad he's got a good turnout.
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't have a ton going on today, including one thing that is due by 5 o'clock, I'd be there in person. But
Well, if you're there in person next week, fix this, will you, Michael?
I will make sure I will get there 15 minutes early and I'm not even that great with AV stuff. For having been a film major, I'm okay. I'm not great. Do we know which passage they're discussing right now, if anything, or is this general introduction?
I don't know. I don't think
Oh.
it said.
Of enthusiasm.
There we go.
Boy, I'm
Oh, well. Now it's been muted.
matter. Paul, an apostle. Now that right away is a very important word for us to note and to kind of circle. We know that the word apostle was a title that Jesus gave his 12 followers, his disciples. Those were the 12 that he personally called, that he chose, that he commissioned, that he authorized to teach in his name. And with the exception of Matthias following Judas in the book of Acts, there were no successors to those apostles. They were the only ones. And the New Testament throughout is clear that these 12 were very called, they were very unique, there was a small group. And that tells us, right, that they were very different than a fellow believer or a brother or sister in Christ, or the word saint, the saints of the church. Apostles are a distinction. Now, Paul is calling himself an apostle. And he does that because previously the Judaizers, these false teachers, don't look at him that way, even though he looked at himself in that way. As an example, Paul says, all the brethren, all the others in Jerusalem and elsewhere look at me as an apostle. Paul here in verse 1 and 2, by claiming that he is an apostle, is making a very forceful statement that his apostleship is not a designation men or the church gives to me. It's of divine authorship. It is something that that even his sponsors, Ananias and Barnabas, don't have sway over me as an apostle, but it is something the Lord gave to me. He believes he was commissioned by Jesus Christ when he met him on the road to Damascus as the risen Christ. This is the event in Paul's life that made him an apostle. And it is an event that he refers to in many different places. Now, the question for us is, why would Paul insist on himself as an apostle? It is because he believed the entire endeavor of the gospel is at stake. And if Paul were not an apostle of Jesus Christ, then that means that men could, and no doubt did, reject the gospel. And Paul could not bear any Christians being led astray and not believing in the true gospel. Here's the point I'm making. Paul is defending his apostolic authority in order to defend his message. That's a very important point as we begin. He is defending his authority in order to defend his message. He looks at them together. And that's the two-pronged attack that the Judaizers, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, have against Paul. Okay, are you with me? Now, this was a problem for many in the church. And you could argue over the life of the church, it can still be a problem, because we forget sometimes, I'm afraid, that these apostles, including Paul, the authors of the New Testament, they were first apostles and followers of Jesus, not of the church. And they wrote the words they did as apostles of Jesus, not as apostles of the church. In other words, Paul does not begin by claiming he is commissioned by Galatia in any way, but rather by the risen Christ as he met him on the Damascus Road. And that's a big difference. And so my point here is this, that the apostolic authority that Paul claims for himself is from one source, God, the divine authority given to him. It is not human, and it is not even ecclesiastical or church. And because it is divine, he is expecting that the followers of Jesus submit to it. And that becomes hard for us in the history of the church, because there's a lot of things that Paul said that we don't like and we don't agree with. And Paul is aware of that, no doubt. Okay. Now, last point I want to make by way of overview, and then by way of this opening paragraph, is when we consider we want to consider his purpose in writing this letter. And I think the purpose in verse 3 and 4 are very clear. Grace to you and peace from God the Father and to our Lord Jesus Christ. We really want to circle that word grace. Who gave himself for our sins to deliver us from the present evil age, according to the will of the Father. So, verse 3 and verse 4, he sends his peace and his grace, as he does in all of his letters. But he also right away talks about Christian salvation. The source of salvation is grace, and grace alone. God's favor for us, without merit, one-way love. And verse 4 reminds us of the single act, greatest act of grace ever done in history, and that is that Jesus Christ died on the cross to rescue us, to save us from our sins. That is where sort of grace begins and ends. Right there on the cross. So there's a reason Paul, right away in his letter, sort of reminds us all of what the greatest event ever was that gave us this gospel of grace, and that is the sacrificial death of Jesus on the cross. That is where God exhibited his greatest act of reconciliation. And so when Jesus gave himself on the cross, he saves us. And that I think we all can agree, which is then why he, in verse 5, he can only think of one thing. I'm channeling Paul here. He can only think of one thing. He has to sing the doxology. I mean, that's just great news, isn't it? Let's all share in that. So we'll talk more in a moment. But any thoughts you see about this first few verses?
Well, I think how difficult it must be without a common theology, so to speak, for the early Christians. It must have been really challenging.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have a mission statement.
Yeah, exactly.
And a few other contrary perspectives going around.
Yeah, let's talk about Mike's point, because it's a really important one. If you recall, there were Christians became Christians after Jesus was resurrected one of two ways, primarily. One would be former Jews who became Christians, and that's what the Judaizers were. They they were holding on still, especially to circumcision and the dietary laws. They were so adamant about that as an entrance into being a Jew and a Christian, that they wanted everyone else to do it. So if you were a pagan, if you were a Gentile, the Judaizers, these false teachers, wanted you to become a Jew first and then become a Christian, you see. In other words, if you weren't circumcised, they expect you to be circumcised, and then we could talk about being a Christian. And they were still observing many of the Mosaic laws. And Paul is saying that's fine to make those observations, but that has nothing to do with the grace of the gospel of being a Christian. To be a Christian, you have to have faith in salvation. And that's very different. That's the difference of law and grace. And so that's why the Judaizers, who had probably gotten a hold of most of these four churches, were preaching enough to where Paul was concerned. And so you're right. From time to time, you have to correct the errors that happen. And in the early church, you're still developing leadership, and Paul couldn't get around everywhere. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, but we know better now, but we still.
I'm just thinking, in circumcision,
Yeah.
Christ admission, that's quite a barrier to entry.
Yes, it is. No, thank you. But I think I would say that most of the Judaizers had good intentions. That's all they knew. They felt it would be good for everyone to do what they did. And Paul says, good thought, but that's not how it works. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I don't necessarily think there was anything malicious. Now, the Corinthians is a different matter, but that's a different day. Okay, so that's a good point. The church is trying to what we call teach the kerygma, teach the basic doctrine of the church. We're still learning it in the early days. Thank you. Let's could someone volunteer to read verses 6 through 10 of the second paragraph of chapter 1? Oh, thank you, Leslie.
I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another gospel, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you as a gospel contrary to that which we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to that which you have received, let him be accursed. Am I now seeking the favor of men, of God, or am I trying to please men? If I were still pleasing men, I should not be a servant of Christ.
Paul uses strong language, but it's also language that he's giving the false teachers a chance to change. That really reveals a teacher's heart, I think. So he begins with this astonishment at the fickleness, the instability of the Galatians. He complains that these false teachers were troubling these Galatian churches. And it's very interesting. The Greek word for that in verse 6, that word deserting is interesting. It's a word in the Greek that means turning away. The Greek is methothethene, which means literally to transfer one's allegiance. And it is originally a word in the Greek used of soldiers in the army who desert or who revolt, who are a turncoat, if you will. That is what Paul is accusing some of the false teachers in Galatians of doing. They are, if you will, religious turncoats, religious deserters. They are turning away from him who called them through the grace of God, and instead they've decided that they will embrace a different gospel. And so the Galatian converts of these false teachers were turning away. Now, what were they turning to? My word is it's a counterfeit gospel. Specifically, it's a gospel of works. You have to do this, this, and this, and this, and this to enter the kingdom of God. And Paul is saying no. Let's look about specifically some of the false teaching, what it was about. As I mentioned, they believed you needed to be circumcised first, continue to follow the law of Moses, and even become a Jew before, if you are a Gentile, before you can be baptized a Christian. And so what's the problem here? What makes these steps unacceptable to Paul? Well, in a word, Paul is saying, if you do it that way, you are letting the Mosaic law finish the work of Christ in you, and you've got it backwards. Does that make sense? That's real important, I think. You are, at the final analysis, being more obedient to someone or something other than Jesus Christ. And you have decided that you must now add more work than what Christ has done. Christ died for our sins once and for all. He doesn't need to die again for our sins. It already happened. And you see, and so they're thinking there has to be one more. And so we get in that trap, you see, when we say, my prayers have not been answered. I've come for you. See, that's the law. I have been teaching junior high boys Sunday school for 15 years. Can you believe that? No. And because of that, I've got to do 15 more years. No. You want to do 15 more years because you love it. You want to pray more because that's the fruits of the grace, not because you have to do it. That's the law speaking. The Protestant work ethic is a good example of doing more to get this, and this, and that's the law working, you see? And it creeps up on us. It happens to me all the time. I am constantly checking the ways that Mike Wyckoff is making decisions that are acceptable to the law and not grace. And so I have to remind myself, wait a minute, Jesus Christ already died for my sins. He doesn't need to do it again. I have sins and I confess them, but you see the difference? The grace and works is at the end of the day where it really comes down to it. And here's a good example of Paul reminding them that it is deadly for Mike Wyckoff to be the one to try to finish Christ's work in my life. Only Christ can do that through his grace. And so Paul is very concerned here, because so many of these people in the pews in Galatia are turning away from God and thus turning away from the gospel of Jesus. And he is saying, be aware, Galatians, that you are forsaking God whenever you forsake the gospel. But thankfully, we know, and Paul will say, that it's never too late. Okay, look at verse 7 with me. That's a wonderful verse. Not that there is another gospel, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. I love that Greek word for the word trouble. The Greek word is paroso, and it means to shake or to agitate. Isn't that interesting? The Galatians congregations have been thrown into a state of turmoil. They have been shaken by these false teachers. There are warring factions going on in the churches. There is intellectual and spiritual confusion going on in these churches. I read somewhere where it is all, when we look at this moment where Paul is in, I think is in Galatia. Thank you so much. When we look back in the book of Acts, chances are the Council of Jerusalem took place shortly after this letter. That was that famous council where the church decided once and for all with Peter and Paul there to look at, okay, how are we going to handle the Jewish circumcision teaching and the dietary laws? How are we going to handle it? And of course, we know that the compromise was that you are welcome to observe those laws if you wish, but they're nothing more than spiritual practices, spiritual aids for you if you wish to grow closer to God. They are not, stepping stones you must take. You see the difference? That's what, in a sense, what the Council of Jerusalem did, and I'm sure Paul's letter to the Galatians had a lot to do with it. And so I think there's always a lesson for us, even today, in this 21st century, that when you are tampering with the gospel, when you're changing the gospel, when you're letting the gospel be replaced by law, there will always be trouble that follows it. And that's why I always like to say the church is created by and lives for the gospel, not the other way around. Okay. And that's why, and you've heard me say this before, the greatest troublemakers that we have in the Christian world are not those who are outside the church, who on my street look at me and wonder what in the world I'm doing. No, it's not it's those who are in the inside, who are trying to change the gospel. That's where we really need to have our flags raised clearly. Paul reacts to this challenge, beginning in verse 8. But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to that which you have received, let him be accursed. That is a very clear condemnation, isn't it? The word accursed or curse literally means in the Greek a ban, a ban, B-A-N. Why would Paul want to do that? Well, if you ban the false teachings from, if they're under a ban, then they would not be in a position to teach. And hopefully that will be something that the audience will be relieved of. So that's the purpose behind his choice of using the word curse or accursed is to ban them from teaching that false gospel. And so why is Paul, is he harsh here? Is he too striding here? And I would say, no, he's not. And as much as we kind of, recoil from Paul's strong language, let's look at it from Paul's point of view. He realizes and he earnestly believes that the souls of these Christians in Galatians are at stake. To him, this is not a trivial point. It is one thing, and I'm aware that I am sure in my almost 40 years of ministry that I have spouted things that are false. If I did, it was not by intention, but it was just me being stupid that time, or not aware of what I was doing. It's one thing to hold false views. I suspect we have all done that without knowing. But it's another thing to teach it and to potentially spread the false teaching out in the congregation. Because if the gospel is corrupted, then the gospel cannot do its job. And its job is really simple: to win the lost for Jesus, to save souls. And Jesus warns us here and in many other places please, please do not be a stumbling block, says that in Corinthians, do not be a stumbling block to others. All right? That's a good warning for us to heed, I think. We've got about 10 more minutes. I've got a few concluding thoughts. Do you all have any thoughts about that? Please, Dave.
Yeah, it makes constant reference to the gospel. Now, were the 4 gospels published by them?
Yeah.
They're accessible to the churches.
Yeah. So those gospels were written as we know them much later.
Right.
He would use the gospel not as Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, but what we would call literally the translation of the good news of Jesus. So it would be Jesus's teaching. It would be the knowledge of his miracles. The parts that the church knew about the 3 years of Jesus's ministry, plus the resurrection, plus the early days of Acts. That's part of, because remember, the writer of Luke wrote the writer of Acts, so that would have been knowledgeable. If I said this before, if we were by chance worshiping in the first, say, up until maybe 50, 60 AD, we were going to a church in Antioch or Jerusalem, chances are, one of the surviving apostles like James of Jerusalem would be there giving the sermon, you see. And so James would have been a wonderful first witness, and Paul would have been the same way. So that's what we mean by the gospel, the body of teaching, the good news of Jesus. The earliest gospel was Mark, written about 75 AD, maybe 20 years after this letter. The last one was John, written about 90 AD. And it just took a while for these oral stories to be transcribed into written stories that then we have as the New Testament canon we know. That's the process. It's a good question, though. Yeah, real good question. Any other thoughts?
So then,
Yeah, John.
kind of a continuation of that thought, that speaks to Paul's need to identify himself as an apostle. If they were the oral, I'd say the oral stories, the written ones didn't exist.
And I've always believed one of the greatest gifts that St. Paul has given us is the ability to actually interpret what Jesus said, to help us understand what Jesus meant and said and did. We need Paul to sort of make it all make sense of Jesus' ministry. I really believe that. He was that astute of a thinker and writer.
Was Paul any better at that than the other apostles?
I think yes, I would say the 2 greatest theologians of the New Testament are clearly, in my view, Paul and John. The Gospel of John is such a different gospel, and so mystical and wonderful and different that it gets us to always think. When we read Paul, when we read John, it just is something new at every verse almost. I think those 2 are definitely, in my view, in my New Testament professors at Virginia Seminary, the cream of the crop, in my view. Others are good, but these guys were just in a whole nother league.
I wonder, how did Paul get the information? Some of the churches were.
Right. And so, sure. And so no one knew Galatia better than Paul. Why? Because Paul and Barnabas founded it. They were the first people that came to preach ever at these 4 communities and teach as well. So they would come and they would stay for a few weeks and move on. So they knew Galatia well. They knew who the false teachers were. They don't name who the false teachers, but they knew who, who's this guy Mike Wyckoff over here, you see, but they would have known in their network all of the people by name. And later on in the next chapter, he's going to start naming the true teachers that interacted with Galatians. And they'll be familiar names to you. I forgot who they were offhand. So he gets around. He gets around. Remember, he had 4 missionary journeys. And if you were to look at that map, you could tell that what he's doing. So you see where Jerusalem is down here. And so, there's Damascus where he has conversion. And what he's doing is he's just, that first missionary journey is the closest to Jerusalem. The second one is maybe a little bit the northern part of Galatia, Asia Minor. He'll eventually go where? To Turkey, right? Then his third missionary journey will be to all those Greek churches, right? The Corinthians, Ephesians, etc. And then, of course, the fourth journey, he goes to Rome with the intent of going to Spain, but he's imprisoned in Rome. So he really gets around. Okay. Yeah. And so this is what's so interesting to me is the first missionary, I had to remind myself that I've forgotten, the first missionary, he founded the church, but he's doing other stuff and he doesn't get around to writing the letter of Galatians until maybe 10 years later in his third missionary journey. So he's really, that's why he always had, literally he had secretaries with him, people to transcribe his letters.
So we have a couple comments.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
So Brenda Towle said, thank you. I love the detail he is giving about why there was confusion. And then Terry Martin asks, what is the role of good works in one's life?
Yes. I really want to, Sherry, I'm so glad you said that. So where does works and good works fit in? It fits in as a outpouring of the grace that is in our lives. Because there is grace in our lives and our heart has been strangely warmed, as John Wesley says, we can't help but want to pray more, to give more to the church, to teach junior high boys. But it's where the motive comes from. Okay, it's where the motive comes from. Not because I have to do it, otherwise I'm less than the Christian I need to be. No, I want to do it as an outpouring of the love that Jesus has in my heart. I can't help but want to give more. Do you see the difference? So I hope that helps, because that's a really important question Sherry made. I may not have been clear enough on that. So that's why we want to examine our motives.
She says, thanks.
Oh, good.
One said if I had a roommate, Pat, and she always he's constantly picking himself up for things. Oh, I didn't study hard enough, so now I'm being punished. Or I didn't call my mom, so now I'm being punished. Everything that happened to her was punishment. What she didn't do. I just only after church minute, she was like, oh, because of this, I need to go pray more. Or do confession, do sort of.
There's the law.
And so
It's the law. That's a good example of the law. Yeah. So here's just some concluding points that I'd like to sort of review with you. I love in the Gospel of John where Jesus says in the chapter 14 in the the Thomas narrative, I am the way, the truth, and the life. There's only one gospel. And for Christians, there's not all these, different gods, but there is a gospel that is unchanging over the years. It's the gospel of grace, that through faith, you and I are saved by his grace. And I want us to remind ourselves that if we, for whatever reason, hear a different gospel than that, then that is a false gospel. That is a perverted gospel. It is important to distinguish between right and wrong here. And so the follow-up question would be then, how do you and I recognize a one true gospel? We begin by looking at its substance. You know, when you look at an old moldy bologna sandwich and it doesn't smell good, chances are it's not going to taste good either. So you put that sandwich aside. That's kind of a crude metaphor, but the point is the same thing with looking at the gospel of grace. Where is the grace in this teaching? Is this teaching speak to God's one-way love, his unmerited favor for us? So let us be very careful when we hear a teaching where other men and women are exalted and not Jesus. When we hear a message where somehow we can be saved by our own morality, our own good works. No, that should raise some red flags with us. A gospel that is preached in alignment with the scriptures and the apostolic teaching of the church is the gospel message that we want to follow. And you all are blessed here, as I think the whole history of this parish, with priests who have taken very carefully the apostolic message of the gospel. And then finally, my last point is, as Paul will be teaching us throughout this course, we never want to compromise with the false teaching, with the Judaizers, but neither can we desert the faithful, like some were doing in the Church of Galatia. Rather, by grace, we must seek out, we must live, we must share the gospel with others. And sometimes that means staying when it's tough to stay. Okay? Yeah. All right. So this 50 minutes is good. And good. Okay, let's end on that. And we will pick up next week. If you all want to read ahead ever, that's why I brought this out. Let me just tell you real quick. Some of you all may not know. You can cut it off if you want to, Rob. I just want to visit. So I've been, as of last February, I've been working half-time at Church of the Good Shepherd, which is a wonderful gift to me because that's where I began my ministry right out of seminary when Bishop Benita has assigned me to Good Shepherd. And where I met my wife, Martha, years ago, and we were married there, and I was ordained there. And so it's a very special place to us. Her parents are in the columbarium there. So it's been a real, when the bishop said, "Oh, Mike, how's it going back to Good Shepherd?" I said, "Well, it's like a blast from the past." And so I'm there only because they need some teaching, they need help on Sundays, and some pastoral care work, which are three things I enjoy. And so you'll see, I had to organize this so I didn't get out of step. On Thursday, I'll be here, the same class I'm doing on Sunday. And that's why you'll see 2 dates for each line, so you know what I'm doing. So you all are the guinea pigs. And then Good Shepherd gets the